All right, let's take a look at our lesson for today. So today we're going to look at law of cosines. Let's talk about the formula first. So this represents the letters, the small letters represent sides of the triangle, and this represents an angle. Now this technique works with all kinds of triangles, oblique triangles, any kind of triangles, which is great. It's very powerful. But there's one thing that you have to keep in mind, and that is, and I call these like the bookends or the anchors. These two, this side measure and this angle, have to be opposite of each other. They must be. Okay, so they must be opposite each other. One of the most common mistakes that I see is people pairing them up inappropriately, like pairing angle C with, side A or something crazy like that. So what do I mean by that? Let's just remind ourselves, what do I mean by opposite? So if we have a triangle, ABC, and if, we've got, let's just make up numbers, so 2, 5, and 9. Okay, so if I want to find let's say I want to find this angle B. What I would do is this angle B would be right here, right? The letter doesn't really matter. I hope we understand that C doesn't mean that all triangles with the C on it, this is how it works. The letters are just placeholders. Okay, they're just placeholders. And so then this number would go here. Okay, so that's how that would work. The A, so again, the letters don't matter. When I square numbers and add them together, does it really matter which order I add them in? Or when I multiply two numbers together, does it really matter which order? So where we put the 2 and the 5 doesn't really matter. I could put the 2 in place of the 2 A's or in place of the 2 B's. It doesn't matter. So that's how you would set it up. That's how you would set up the law of cosines. Now the great thing about law of cosines is law of cosines will give you an obtuse angle for an answer. So if you really love law of sines and you would rather do that, you can find the largest angle first with law of cosines, and then you can switch to the law of sines to find the rest of the angles. So that's kind of a choice that you have. Or if you just love law of cosines, you can just use law of cosines. Continue to use it. All right, well, let's do some examples. You'll need your calculator with you. This is definitely a calculator lesson. All right, so let's set it up. So we have two sides of a triangle that have lengths 3 centimeters and 7 centimeters. I'm going to draw my triangle. I always label it ABC. Well, not always, but that's pretty straightforward, ABC. Let's see, two sides of a triangle. Let's say that this side is 3 and this side is 7. And the angle between them is 130 degrees. Now, do we remember what that means? Angle between them. Okay, the angle between those two sides would be angle A, and this one is 130 degrees. Okay, they want us to find the length of the third side, and we're going to call the third side A. Typically that's a normal thing, like a normal convention, where the angle measures are large capital numbers and the side measures are lowercase, and like angle A, side opposite would be little a. So that's just a convention that's typically used. Do you have to do that? No. That's just a kind of a normal thing that mathematicians like to do. All right, so let's write our formula up here. You're not going to have to memorize it yet. I'm sure in pre-cal you'll need to memorize it. But for us, we don't need to memorize it. We just need to know how to use it. So I'm going to, I like to highlight, I call it the anchors, right? This is my anchors right here. I'm going to be starting my formula. I know that says C, but I don't really care about C yet. So I'm going to anchor it. So I've got a squared equals. Now it doesn't really matter, so I'm putting that in place of the C because that's what I'm interested in. It doesn't really matter what order I put the 3 and the 7, so I could do 3 squared plus 7 squared minus 2 times 3 times 7, right? So this number matches this one, and this number matches this one. We were having a little bit of trouble with that the other day, so that's where they go. And then it's cosine of angle A. All right, so this is something we're going to put in our calculator. This is not something we're going to do, by hand. So, and actually we know angle A. Angle A is 130 degrees. All right, so let's navigate to our calculator and let's work on putting that in. So we're going to, of course, we're not going to put this in. This is what we want to know. We're going to put this right side in. Okay, so we need to be sure our calculator's in degrees. So there we go, we're in degrees. So it's 3 squared plus 7 squared minus 2 times 3 times 7 times cosine of 130 degrees. I'm going to hit Control Enter. Okay. So we know that number is bigger than that appears. If I want to look at the whole number, I suppose what I could do is go up here and grab it. So, right, it's gigantic. And usually when we're doing calculations, we would want to use the full number. So let's see so is that our side length, this? I don't think so. Let's go back and look at the problem. So it's 84.9971. So a squared is 84.9971 and a bunch of other stuff. So now we need to solve for a. We've got to go back and we've got to square root that number. So let's go back and I'm going to do the square root. So Control X squared, there's my square root. My cursor is here. I'm going to pull that number down and hit Enter. So the side length is actually 9.219. Okay, so let's put that in there and then I'll talk about the calculator for just another minute. So A is 9.219 and we're in centimeters. Now it's going to be important for us to know how to store numbers because if I'm going to be using that number for other things, it's kind of hard to pull it down every time. So to store, I'm just going to remind you, I'm sure you probably already know, so to store it, there's this little blue button right here, so you hit second VAR, there's the store. And you want to store it as one of these white letters. Don't do the gray letters because the gray letters are variables. The calculator will get upset with you. So let's just, I don't know, let's store it as A because that's what it was, right? It was A, or actually it's A squared. And so that means every time you hit A and enter, it's going to have that number in it. It's going to have the whole number too, not just the little part. It's just my calculator is cut. It's fixed 4 decimal places, so you can't see it all. All right, so I just want to make sure we knew how to, so just to demonstrate, I would to do my square root right here, I could just put in the A because I stored that number, and then that gives me that same number. Okay, so just a couple of different ways to do it. All right, let's look at our next problem. So now we've got, it's a little bit more complicated. Let's see what we got going on. So AB is 5, BD is 2, DC is 4, and CA is 7. And they want us to find AD. Let's just call that X for right now. That's what they want us to find. So we really don't have any angles whatsoever. I really can't, so some students are like, well, why don't you use, you know, SOHCAHTOA? Well, this is not a right triangle, right? We can't just look at something and assume because it looks like a right triangle it might be. You know that from geometry that's not a thing. So let's see. So what should we do? So we can't just work on that. We're actually going to have to work on the larger triangle. You know, the whole, we need this. I want to work on angle B. I want to work on angle B. Wouldn't really be, I could work on angle C, that would be fine. But angle A really wouldn't be a good idea because it's split and we don't really know how it's split. So let's kind of avoid that, just avoid that. So we're going to try to work on finding angle B. And so my anchor is going to be this, the angle B and the 7. So let's set up our formula. So I have it 7 squared equals 5 squared. Now we need this whole side. It's not 2 or 4. It's actually have to add those together. It's going to be 6 squared because we're doing the big triangle, right? So plus 6 squared minus 2 times 5 times 6 cosine of angle B. Now this is a little different one than we worked on the first problem. Our unknown is the angle measure, not the side. So we need to do a little bit of, you know, algebra. We need to solve for cosine B. Okay, so let's do that. So 7 squared is 49. So 25 plus 36. Let's see, 2 times 5, 10 times that's 60. Cosine B. So I need to solve for cosine B. What would I do first? Would I move the 25 and 36 or would I divide? Yep, I would move the 25 and the 36. So I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to do 49 minus 25 minus 36 and it gives me a negative 12 equals negative 60 cosine of B. Now solving for cosine of B, negative 12 divided, and you would have a calculator obviously. Negative 12 divided by negative 60 simplifies to be the fraction 1/5. Okay, so this takes us back to inverse trig. So remember to get to the angle, and I'll write out this step. You don't have to write it out for me in your work, but I have an equation. I'm going to do the inverse cosine or arc cosine of both sides. So this inverse cosine of cosine, they cancel each other out. They're like opposite operations. And I'm going to be left with angle measure B. And then I'm going to put this in my calculator, inverse cosine of 1/5. Okay, so inverse cosine right here of, and I'm going to use a fraction bar because that's what I want to do. Because why not? 1/5. I'm in degrees. Control enter. Now this is my angle measure, and I really want this entire angle measure. I can't round to the very end. These particular computations, once you get into this, there's going to be a lot of computations, and you really cannot round into the end. So I'm going to store this number. Okay, I'm going to pull it down. And I'm going to store it. I'm going to store it as B, because that was B, wasn't it? Let's just store it as B. Okay, so now every time I hit B, it's going to have that number, that whole number in it. All right, so we've got the angle measure 78.463 degrees. So let's go back here. So angle B is 78.463 with a bunch of stuff degrees. Okay, great. We have one angle measure. That's a big plus, but we still don't have that side measure. All right, so now let's kind of try to narrow down. Let's just work with that one little triangle over here on the side. I'm going to redraw it so it's clear what we're doing. I'm just going to work with this little one right here. So we know this is like 78, you know, whatever degrees. We know that's 2 and that's 5. So now we want to know this, and I'm going to actually call that, you know, side B. So now my anchor happens to be right here. But I'm going to use my law of cosines with that as my anchor. Okay, so here we go. So we've got b squared equals 5 squared plus 2 squared minus 2, because that's part of the formula, times 5 times 2, cosine of this 78 business number, that whole thing. Okay, so now it's just, we've got this part to put in the calculator. That was like the first problem that we did. So let's go to the calculator. We're going to enter all this in, and then we're going to square root it. Okay, so we've got 5 squared, and we've got plus 2 squared minus 2 times 5 times 2 times cosine of this angle measure. So I'm going to, I called that b, cosine of b. Oh, that's crazy. It gives us an even number, like an integer. What? 25. We did cosine of this really weird number and we got 25. That's greatness. All right, so let's go back to here. And so that's going to be, so b squared is 25. And I bet we don't need a calculator to do that square root, right? We should not need a calculator to do that. So side B is 5. Now let's be sure we answer the question they asked. They said find AD. So we're going to, that is AD in this first figure. So we're going to say side AD is 5. Do we have any units? Nope. All right, and that is the lesson for today.